everyone. So this week I was really excited because it's bread week on the Great British Baking Show. So we're going to dive into 3 different bread types. The first one that they did was flatbread. So we're going to do a focaccia in this episode, but we're also going to do a Scottish flatbread that I'd never heard of. They're considering it a flatbread. I almost consider it like a potato cake, but what do I know? I'm just a baker. So we're going to do it anyway. It's super duper easy. I tried it. I really enjoy it. It kind of reminds me of what my mom used to do with leftover mashed potatoes when I was a kid. So I'm really excited about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with potatoes. This recipe, I did a half batch and it made 6 sized, you'll see them at the end, but 6 smaller sized ones. That would be way more than enough for my family, of me and my husband. I don't know how big your family is, but if you follow the recipe that I put on the blog, it's going to make 6 larger sized ones. I'll make note of that over there, so in case you go to make it and forget, you'll see it and know. But I think that the smaller sized ones are perfect for one person. I think these would be great. You could do them for dinner with steak, you could do them for breakfast with eggs and ham or bacon. They're really delicious and very versatile. One of the other things that I saw on some of the recipes were suggesting that you could eat them cold with maybe like cream cheese and salmon on it. I don't really eat a whole lot of fish, but I think with smoked salmon it would actually be really, really good. So you'll have to try it and let me know how you liked it. For the full-sized recipe, it would be about 4 of these medium-sized potatoes. You want something that's a little bit more mealy, which means that it's kind of gritty when you cut it open. I baked them off in the oven at 400 degrees first, and then it's really easy to get the skin off. That way you don't have to peel them ahead of time. So if you have kids, this is a good job to give them. I'm using a paring knife, but you could give them a butter knife. And you kind of just want to pull the skin away. And it's super easy. It just peels right off. You don't even really need a knife. I kind of just use it to help grab the peeling of the potato. So once that's peeled, you're going to throw it into your mixing bowl. And this is a super cheap recipe to make too, because it's literally just potatoes, self-rising flour. You could probably use all-purpose. A lot of the recipes I saw said all-purpose. The one that I picked to modify had self-rising, and I had self-rising flour in my cabinet that I kind of needed to use up, so that's what I used. But honestly, they don't rise at all because it's so little flour to potato ratio, so you could use whatever you have in your cabinet. So you'll just peel this potato, you'll add it to your mixing bowl with the flour, just a tiny bit of butter. I think it's like 2 tablespoons. It's not a whole lot at all. Maybe 3 tablespoons. And then some salt. And that's literally it. So it's 4 ingredients. I ended up adding a little bit of pepper to mine because I like to add pepper to almost everything. I think it gives a good flavor to things. It kind of rounds out the flavor. It gives a little bit more depth. You could probably also add other things. If you wanted to do like cheddar and chives, you could probably do that. I'm just going to break this guy in half so it's not so big. I'm not going to do anything other than that. I just throw it in there. And then our flour and salt and pepper. And then our little bit of butter. And then you're just going to throw that on the mixer with your paddle guy and let it do its thing until it forms a dough. It'll be really like, it won't be sticky. It'll actually be kind of like, you can touch it and it won't stick to your hand at all, which is nice because of the potatoes. But you'll see it's kind of gluey once the flour mixes in. So I'm going to throw that on there and mix it. It literally only takes like a minute or 2 before it all comes together. And then we will fry them. And then we'll be done. See, 5 minutes and it's done. Alright, so we're back. And here's our nice potato-y dough ball. As you can see, it's literally a ball of dough. That's kind of what it becomes when you throw it into the mixer. We're just going to flatten it out a little bit. And I have it in like a nice circle because we're going to cut it into triangles later. And if you start with a circle, you'll end up with a circle. So we're just going to press it out a little bit. You can use a rolling pin. Honestly, you probably don't even need a rolling pin, but this just makes it easier. And I did put a little bit of flour on my countertop. Honestly, you probably don't even need to, but that I did just to be safe. So now that it's about a ½ inch thick or so, we're going to cut it. You can use a knife. I'm just going to use my pizza roller and we'll cut it into 6. So this is the nice little size that I was talking about. I think this is perfect for one person because it's a lot of potato. But if you did the full-size recipe, they would probably be about twice that size. So whatever you think is good for your family. So I already warmed up my pan with some butter in it. And I'm going to place these in. You want to put them in a hot pan so that your tatties are nice and crispy, and we're going to cook it on each side for about 4 to 5 minutes. When I flipped them the first time I made them, the other side browned really fast, so I didn't cook it as long. It was a little bit floury in the middle. I only cooked the second side for about 2 minutes, so I would suggest after you flip them to turn your pan down a little bit so it doesn't brown quite so fast, and it cooks like completely to the middle. The middle was warm. I felt like it could go a little bit longer so that it didn't end up so floury. So we're going to let these cook, and then when I flip them, I will show you what the underside looks like so you can see how beautiful and crispy and golden brown it is. So here we are. See how nice and golden brown and beautiful they are. And then I also taken some out of the pan already. These guys, those were from earlier. But super easy. No reason to not try it. It's 4 ingredients. Enjoy! Hey, so since we've made our Scottish potato tatties, we are going to go ahead and make our focaccia. So I have my flour in here, and then we're going to add our yeast on one side. And I kind of briefly mentioned this when we did the tropical rum baba, but in case you haven't watched that, there's 2 different kinds of yeast. There's active dry, and then there's instant, which also says bread machine on it because it's what you would use if you had a bread machine. If you're doing it like I'm doing it in the blog, you'll need the instant yeast, which is the bread machine one. And that one, you just throw everything all in at once and then put it on your mixer. So we're going to have our yeast here, our flour here, and our salt. The thing we're going to add is our liquid. I did a little bit less than 1/4 cup of oil and then the rest water. So if you're doing the full recipe, because it's only half recipe, then you would do a little less than 1/2 cup and then the rest water so that you have 2 cups of liquid. So we're going to add that, and then we're going to put it on our mixer with the dough hook, which is this guy, and we're going to let it go until we have a nice smooth dough. You might need to add a little bit of extra flour. I've made this recipe and I've had to add way more flour to it just to get it so that it's not so sticky. So you just have to play around with it. You don't want to add too much flour because you don't want it to be a brick. So I would let it go for a little while, and then you can touch it and see. It will be a little bit sticky. It will stick to your finger a little bit, but if it's like soupy sticky, then you need to add more. But we'll look at it after this mixes for a little bit and see if we need to add more flour or not. So this has been going for a few minutes. As you can see, it's like sticky, but it's not completely sticky. I would add maybe a little bit more water because, or I'm sorry, a little bit more flour because it seems like it's more of a gluey than an elasticy dough. So I'm just going to add maybe 1/4 cup and start there and see how that looks. And we'll let it go for another few minutes and then decide if we need to add more or not. So I added about 1/4 cup, maybe a little bit less flour to this guy, and as you can see, it's more of a doughy than it was before. So that's what we're looking for. We're gonna let this go for maybe another 3 or 4 minutes, just so that it builds up some more gluten stability, and then we're gonna check it and see if we're good to go to let it raise for the first proof. So our dough is mixed, and I wanted to show you a trick so that you know exactly how long your dough needs to mix. So this is like the minimum. You want to take a little piece of your dough and have flour on your fingers. You can roll it into a little bit of ball, and then you just want to slowly pull it apart until you get to this point where you can actually see sunlight through it. So you can see the light through it. If you can't pull it apart and it starts ripping too much, then you might need to keep going. Honestly, I could probably let this keep going for another few minutes and it would be perfectly fine. But we're going to stop it there for time's sake. We're going to grease our pan. I have a piece of parchment down. You could probably do it right on your pan. There's enough oil that it's not going to really stick. But I like to just do it on parchment because then it's easier to clean up my pan. So you're just going to wipe your oil all over your parchment. It's like about a tablespoon of olive oil. And then you can stick your dough right on top. flatten it down a little bit. So we're going to let this rest for about an hour and a half so that it will double in size. It kind of depends, the time depends on the temperature of your kitchen. If your kitchen is a little bit warmer, it might take less time. If it's colder, it might take a little bit longer. If it seems like it's not doing anything, but you know your yeast is good, your yeast isn't old, you can boil a pot of water on your stove, and then once it's boiling, stick it in the bottom of your oven and put this at the top of your oven, and the steam from the water will, the warmth and everything will help it move along a little bit faster. So, but before I would do that, I would get whatever yeast you had left and test it and make sure that your yeast isn't bad, especially if you're using the instant yeast where you just throw everything in, because you're not really testing it beforehand like you would if you were using the active dry. So to test it, you would do the same thing you would with the active dry and just give it a little bit of sugar and a little bit of warm water, and if it foams up, then you know it's good. So if that's the case, then maybe your kitchen is just a little bit too cold. So we're going to let this sit. You can cover it like loosely with a towel if you'd like, so that it doesn't form a skin on top. It's just where the dough starts to dry out a little bit. It's not the end of the world if it happens. We'll just flip it over onto the oily side, and no one will know the difference. So we're going to let this sit for a little bit. Alright, so we're back, and our nice focaccia has been left alone for about an hour. It's doubled in size, believe it or not. It might not look like it, but it has. If it helps, you can take a before and after picture of yours so that you can sleep easy. But I'm just going to flip it over. Remember we oiled our pan beforehand. So if you feel like it needs a little bit more oil, you can add it. Mine's kind of spread out a little bit, so I'm just going to wipe it around, flip it over, and you want to try and make this as nice of a rectangle as you can get. It's not going to be perfect. It's focaccia, so if it looks a little bit rustic, that's great. But you just want to flatten it out a little bit so you can see. Here's our nice focaccia. So this is the fun part, is the toppings. I like to use fresh rosemary. That's what we used at the restaurant that I worked at. So first thing you're going to do is put a little of olive oil on top. I did about a tablespoon maybe. And just give that a nice spread so that it completely covers the top of your focaccia. But back to toppings. We did rosemary, salt, and pepper. And I thought that was a great combination. I always felt like it needed some garlic though. So today we're going to do the rosemary, salt, pepper, and garlic. Thanks to COVID-19, there was no rosemary to be found at the store this week. So I'm having to use dried rosemary, which is not ideal, and it's not going to be as good, which makes me sad. If you can find fresh rosemary, that's great. I would highly encourage you to do that. You would just peel it off of the stem and then give it a little bit of a chop, unless you wanted to do the whole bit, like the whole leaf part of it on there. I like it chopped because I don't like the whole big chunk of rosemary, but you can do it whichever way you prefer. So put our garlic on. I'm going to sprinkle some salt on. Another nice touch is if you have like sea salt or some other larger salt. I just have the kosher salt, so that's what I'm using, but if you have something else, you can use that instead. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of pepper. And then my sad dried rosemary. And then you'll just push your fingers into it to give it that nice dimpled look that focaccia has. You don't have to be shy. It's not going to hurt it. So then this is what we're left with. And we're going to let this set for another, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour. You'll want it to poof up a little bit. It's not going to go super crazy. It really depends on how hot or cold your kitchen is. We keep our temperature pretty chilly, so I'm going to leave mine on the stovetop while my oven is preheating. So you can do that too. It'll help it move a little bit faster. You just want to keep an eye on it because you don't want it to go too crazy and overproof before you put it in the oven. So mine's probably only going to take about a half hour because there's quite a bit of heat like radiating in this area right now. You're going to preheat your oven, and then once it's done, we'll take another look at it, and then we'll throw it in the oven, and then we'll be able to enjoy it soon. So that's the next part. Alright, so our focaccia has proofed a second time. It's a little bit poofier, as you can see. And we're going to stick it into a hot oven, and that'll help it poof a little bit more. You don't want it to get too poofy because it's supposed to be kind of a flatbread. It's not going to be thin like a pita flatbread, but it is going to be a little bit thinner than like a white bread, like a normal white bread. So we're going to pop this in there, let it do its thing, and then we're going to try it. See ya! Hey, so our focaccia is out of the oven. I baked it for about 25 minutes. I rotated it halfway through so that it got nice and golden brown on both sides. And here we are. This one's nice and thin. If you wanted to go thicker, you totally can. I did a half batch because it's only the two of us. I didn't want to do two full-size batches, one for the blog and then one for the video. So if you do a full-size batch, you can get a loaf that's this size that's twice as thick. Or you can roll it out to the edges of the pan, and it won't be quite this thin, but it won't be twice as thick either. So you have options, but really good, super easy, highly recommend. Enjoy!